It's an honor for me to be here today to participate in your candidates forum. I think that one of the things that I think is extremely important about where we are at this point in time is to engage in the process of what I call smart politics. Smart politics is a process where you evaluate an environment and you adjust your course of action so that you can continue and focus on assisting with developing opportunities to serve people and serve the common needs of humanity. I have provided the editorial board with a detailed plan of action, which is my platform. It focuses specifically on areas of job creation, careers, senior citizens, education, economic development, and healthcare. I think that those are many of the core issues outside of our focuses on government. It is extremely important that in a city that is essentially the center of Ohio business and largest group of folks, at least on the Democratic side, that vote to play smart politics. At a time when we've lost a lot of, all of, in fact, statewide offices and neither control the Senate or the House, we still have an obligation to deal on a daily basis with the issues that are affecting our community. Now, the politics is really carried out by our parties, our respective parties, and once elected, you have a responsibility, at least as a state representative, pursuant to Article 2 of the Ohio Constitution. There is the authority for which we carry out our duties, and I think that our office has been very responsive in all of those areas to do as much as we can for as many people as we can, and I believe that's very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I'd like to also start by talking about the district, and this district does include a portion of the city of Cleveland, but it also has several other municipalities, 9 to be specific, some of which are quite large: Maple Heights, Mayfield Heights, Warrensville Heights. So it's a very diverse district with a lot of different needs. Some of our communities are over 55% women, so women's needs, women's health care, in addition to education, are very important. I'm running for this seat because I've had a passion and a profession in giving voice to the under and unrepresented when I've been at Belfair as a lawyer and a social worker, and for years I've done the work of a caseworker, triaging cases, and I think that representing a district and the needs of a district is somewhat similar. And so I believe that the duties of a legislator includes those things that have to do with dealing directly with the individuals, knowing how to represent them. In our democracy, if you don't vote, you don't count. And as a legislator, if you don't cast a vote, then the 100,000 plus individuals in your district don't count. John has not cast votes on some of the most important items related to taking care of our constituents, and there is no greater duty than casting a vote for or against legislation. Examples include things like HB 294 twice, and also not casting a vote at all on the Ohio budget itself, which of course affects education.
And HB 294 is the Planned Parenthood.
Yes, thank you. The diversion and the diverting of monies, $1.3 million, to go to women's health care services. And in our district, we actually have a Planned Parenthood facility that both employs individuals and serves thousands of women in the district. That's located in Bedford Heights. So again, I'm running for this seat because I believe that your vote is your voice, and a legislator's vote is the voice of the 100,000 plus individuals who live in that district, and we can't afford to have a legislator who does not cast votes on those issues. That is why I'm running for this seat.
Representative Barnes, maybe you want to respond to the issue of why you didn't vote on the Planned Parenthood legislation or on the budget as your opponent characterizes it?
With respect to House Bill 294, I did not believe that I had enough information to make an informed decision about House Bill 294. I was among 3 other folks on the Democratic side and 1 Republican who did not vote on that. Let's face it, that issue is one of the most divisive issues, not only in the state of Ohio, but our nation. And so it's something that you have to take very, very seriously. It also falls in line with an area of what I call smart politics. They have not provided enough information in that process for me to make an informed decision about that particular vote. And so, I mean, I've long have been a very, very strong advocate on behalf of women's health and other issues. But that particular issue carried some aspects of criminality as a result of investigations. It also has been a national issue, and I needed more information. Thank you.
So I'm confused, though, because it was a fairly straightforward vote to remove money from Planned Parenthood and give it to some other clinics not yet identified. So what was unclear about that?
Well, what was unclear is the circumstances surrounding it and what led up to that. It falls in line with how individuals have behaved and how situations arise as a direct result of that. I firmly support the Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade. Let me be very clear about that. But in this particular instance, I felt that there needed to be more information provided in the process. I did not serve on the committee. And when it was brought to the floor, it was sort of a rapid pace situation. And so that was a decision that I felt was appropriate for that time. We're talking about $1.3 million. It's wrong. I think that in retrospect, it's something that I probably would not have want to seen come to the floor. And very clearly, I think that there needed to be more data, and I think that it was a speedy process that I believe was very distasteful for me.
I'm sorry, when you say, just a second, when you say circumstances and situations, are you talking about the video, the Planned Parenthood video, which actually DeWine had basically cleared Planned Parenthood of doing anything shady here in Ohio? So what do you mean by circumstances and situations?
Well, I believe that the law of the land is Roe v. Wade. I respect and support the law, and that's my answer.
But could you explain what you mean by circumstances, situations? That doesn't seem to refer to Roe v. Wade.
Well, the circumstances surrounding that particular bill emanated from the investigations that were going on. And I don't have any data to really speak to the specifics of that. So it'd be very difficult. That's why I use the term circumstances and situations, because it is reflective of data and facts that I'm unaware of.
Could I provide a little bit of context? The vote actually came up twice. It came up once in the fall, I believe October, November, and then it came up again very recently. So there have been several months in between where this bill and its effects have been discussed locally and nationally by many different groups. It's been watched. As we know, Ohio is regularly watched now for what it does in regard to women's reproductive rights. And this bill was no exception. And in fact, just prior to the vote, before the bill went to the governor, the individuals responsible for those videos that led to the initial investigations that then led to this effort to defund Planned Parenthood were indicted in Texas. So there was some conclusion around those videos, at least in terms of one step that was going on. I also want to point out, John is saying that he didn't have enough information. They didn't give him enough information. This is one of the examples that I point to around outreach and knowledge and knowing what's going on and being in touch and being connected to the members of, to your constituency. It's not about just waiting to see what comes to you. It's about being interested in that topic, that there is a Planned Parenthood facility in our district, how many people might lose jobs, how many women will not be able to get services because of this bill. And I believe it's incumbent upon the legislator to be doing their due diligence to find out information about those things. So, with all due respect, HB 294, this defunding of Planned Parenthood, is an issue that's been around for months, if not years. We know other places have also looked at it. It absolutely affects our district, and in particular, Ward 1 in Cleveland has the 4th highest rate of infant mortality in the city of Cleveland. That rate is directly related to prenatal care. And we know that the services that Planned Parenthood provides absolutely touch on prenatal care. So there is simply no question that this change that the legislators sought and that Mr. Barnes' failure to vote on, one way or the other, absolutely affects thousands of constituents directly in our district and all around Northeast Ohio.
Although his vote wouldn't have made a difference one way or the other.
If the vote doesn't make a difference, then I'm not sure why someone would want to be there in the first place.
But you're implying his vote was the difference between it passing and not, but in fact it would not have been.
I am certain that if we were to counsel people, generally speaking, about taking that action, they aren't individuals we'd be supporting running for office, because part of being a legislator is casting votes on very controversial issues, regardless of whether you know what the outcome will be. That would be my opinion on that. It's part of the job.
Yeah.
So, Representative Barnes, what
Well,
do you say to that?
first of all, I think that I support and respect Roe v. Wade. With respect to the health care, as early as yesterday, the Plain Dealer had an article in there about what Planned Parenthood intends to do in terms of making up that. The issue also has to do with, I'm not going to try to compete with Ms. Zimon on this issue. She's a board member of Planned Parenthood. And so as a board member...
I'm actually on leave. I've been on leave.
Well, you're a board member on leave. And so as a result of that, she is in a unique position to understand that issue more than most. There are some other issues surrounding that, I think, that which she placed in her literature about me was really false. And this is a consistency with Mrs. Zimon and her campaign about putting out information that is false. What I try to do, I've never actually mentioned her anywhere that I've gone in the district. I've never mentioned her in most instances as it pertains to this campaign. I focus on John Barnes and his responsibility to his district to provide information, to provide representation, to provide advocacy on behalf of the people. And I think that people who are aspiring to enter the political arena should, we've seen enough of this junk politics going around the country now. We don't need that. And I, first of all, have to say that I don't have the luxury of focusing in on one issue. I have a tremendous amount of issues as a result of the biggest economic downturn in the history of this nation since the Great Depression, having to deal with unemployment, having to deal with an $8 billion budget deficit, having to deal with one of two communities in Cuyahoga County that is in fiscal emergency, having to do with teen unemployment, having to do with people who have mental problems, having to do with the at-risk factors that has a substantial impact on children's ability to learn in schools. So we try to do as much as we can. Now, Ms. Zimon is very well aware that in this process of government and in the process downstate, that it's predicated based on who has the votes. Before that bill got on the floor, it was well known that it was going to pass. It did pass, and today it is now law.
And I don't think that's an
And
excuse
please don't
for
interrupt
why.
me. May I?
don't
Please
think-
do not
I don't
interrupt
think that's
me.
an excuse
Miss-
for why.
I
but
would like to
could-
hear the rest of them.
Could you? Yeah, let's be civil here. I think that in that legislative process, and the people who are feeding her information about that has to do more with control than it has to do with whether or not you are making an informed decision. And today it is law. It's law. She's a member of the Planned Parenthood board. And she is advocating because she's trying to hijack the political process to ignore other issues in the community that are important. And that is the essence of it. She often goes around talking about, well, hey, this is what a real Democrat does. Well, I mean, nobody has, set aside and said Ms. Diamond sets up the definition of what a Democrat is. But she tries to espouse that as she goes around the district with a lot of innuendos and untruths about people.
He's now said twice that I've provided information that is false. I think it would be helpful to know, if you're going to be accusing me of lying, that you actually point out what is false.
Read your literature. You're a lawyer.
Mr. Barnes, you're making the accusation.
You read your literature.
Everything that I have on there is accurate and cited. So I really don't know what you're talking about.
Ms. Zimon, Jill, I did not cast a vote on House Bill 294.
Twice.
I did not cast a vote on House Bill 294. And that's a fact. I was not there. And so that is all that has to be said about that. But your literature suggests that somehow
I am going to
John
interrupt
Barnes is taking away. He is.
Excuse me, I do want him to finish.
Her literature suggests that somehow I'm taking away women's health, cervical. I supported the breast cancer bill that was sponsored. I co-sponsored that bill. I have a bill that I have in the process right now about respect your date for women. I have been an advocate and have participated in everything that comes up because she's a board member of Planned Parenthood that is going to that's losing money. That is losing money as a result.
The Planned Parenthood board did not even come into existence until last summer. So I'm 53. Up until the age of 53, I knew a lot about reproductive rights and about Planned Parenthood. That had nothing to do with being on their board. I also want to say that some of how you've described this, John, is to place women and focusing on women's health and everything that comes from that as a luxury, that you don't have the luxury to focus on that because of lots of other things. Women make up more than 50% of the district's population. We have a facility that employs people from the district. We have a facility that serves people from the district. I do not think in Bedford Heights.
What are you talking about?
There's a plan.
Who is we? I don't understand who you're talking about.
We live in the same district. Our district.
So what you're saying is your office is in Bedford Heights for the organization for which you are a board member. Is that what you're saying?
No.
I'm aware of Planned Parenthood that's located in Bedford Heights. It's right on Rockside Road.
Yes, and they provide services.
I know about that. There's little in my district that I don't know about, Ms. Zimon. I don't have the luxury of focusing on one issue. I support women's
Let's talk about
health.
another issue. Let's talk about the budget and not voting on our Ohio budget.
Before we move on,
you're not asking the questions.
I would like to know, Representative Barnes, because there is a Planned Parenthood clinic in your district, why that didn't prompt you to do more due diligence on this legislation. Because you said you didn't vote on it because you didn't know enough.
I have, on occasion, contacted Planned Parenthood to have a meeting with them, and they never followed up. In fact, they called my office and canceled the meeting. So we have tried to reach out. In addition to that, I can tell you that my experience, there has become a little more harshness in trying to distort people's records as it pertains. I mean, I have a sister, I have a mother, I have a fiance, I have a grandmother. I care deeply about women's health. That is not, that should not be an issue. But Mrs. Zimon, Jill, has tried to make that an issue through distortions in her literature, trying to use a group of words that sort of purposefully obfuscates the process of truth. And that is very, very unfair for a person who has been supported.
So the other question I wanted to ask you on this point is you mentioned at the outset of your explanation that this was part of your smart politics approach, which suggests to me that there was a quid pro quo involved. In other words, if you didn't vote on this legislation, some other benefit would accrue to you. Was there a quid pro quo?
Absolutely not. I don't. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, Ms. Sullivan. That's not an issue that would be negotiable. I think that women's health is very, very important. If I had the magic wand, I would give them $5 million, right? But I don't. And in the environment that we're operating in, I think that it's grossly unfair to take a non-vote, try to turn it into opposition to. And that's my point. And that's what Mrs. Jill has attempted to do in her literature, clearly.
Well, supporting women's health isn't just about supporting the bills that you believe are going to pass. Supporting any issue isn't just about supporting legislation that will pass. It also has to do with advocating and championing those things that most need it. I actually would say I think the plain dealer's work around the dredging is a perfect example of that. And many people in our community are tirelessly and relentlessly working on an issue where many people would say everything is stacked against us. But that is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to continue to look at all the different avenues.
So I'd like to switch topics.
But may I just conclude with this? But that does not give you the right to distort someone's record.
Well, I disagree with the distortion. You continue to, you don't want to point out how it's distorted.
And it's just untrue. So I'll just leave it at that.
But it's not untrue. You didn't vote.
Certainly untrue.
So let's move on. Your opponent says that you're going around telling people he's not a real Democrat. And now, have you been endorsed by the Democratic Party?
I have not, but I also haven't been going around saying he's not the real Democrat. I've simply been asserting that the way that I would like to represent this district, the kind of outreach that I would like to do, the kind of actual information provision, which has been completely lacking since John got in January of 2015. I have received nothing by mail. There have been no district meetings anywhere near my community. There is no email sent. Many electeds use email and send out email broadcasts. There's been nothing like that. So when he talks about providing information as being a responsibility of legislators, as a constituent, I've received nothing, and most of the folks that I've been in touch with, other than a central area within Ward 1, likewise, have not been part of any kind of broad-based outreach on any ongoing basis.
Right. But when you ran the last time, you were endorsed by the Democratic Party, is that correct?
I was endorsed by the state party. I did not seek the state party's endorsement this time, so no, neither of us have that.
But at any rate, there was a perception, we had the perception that because Representative Barnes does not vote Democratic 100% of the time, that the party was looking for a candidate who would. And I wonder if you could address that.
I can't. Yeah,
perception.
I can't really. I can't speak to the perception since it wasn't the perception that I had. I knew how hard I was working and why I was doing it and why I entered the race, and that they felt that they had someone who would be aligned with them was for them to make that decision. I mean, as far as the perception, my principles and the pragmatic way that I prefer to go about seeing things get done happen to also align with many things that are important to the Democratic Party, the values, everything from women to outreach to economic development, public education. So, I mean, there's no question. I'm in a Democratic primary.
Right. But there has been a conscious effort on the part of the Republican Party leadership in the state to reach out to specifically to African American legislators from urban areas to support them on some issues. And that has led to maybe some horse trading, but perhaps, as one could argue, has also benefited communities that might not get legislation out of an assembly, general assembly that's so dominated by Republicans. So is it sort of the perfect at the expense of the pragmatic that is sacrificed if you're too pure an ideologue?
I think that we, as a legislator, I think you have to continuously press that it shouldn't be an either or. This isn't about bricks and not babies. If you're going to get earmark dollars for a particular program, a particular piece of infrastructure, you need to be also advocating for those dollars for the babies as well. So I think that it's all wrapped up together. You should not have to make that sacrifice. And I think that somebody who behaves as an advocate and behaves as a legislator in the typical tradition of representation would be pursuing all of that. I don't think you have to sacrifice pragmatism, no.
Just to ask, okay, because you said that you shouldn't have to sacrifice your traditional beliefs, but then you're not actually doing anything but being a rhetorical champion, but you're not bringing back anything practical.
Well, I'd love to give a great example where I think that that's actually not the case, and I've had a hand in it, and I'm really proud of that, too, actually. One was the regionalism effort that was in the governor's first 4 years. A gentleman named Randy Cole, who's now head of the Turnpike Commission, was head of the controlling board, but he also had a pot of money under him that had to do with efficient government. When I worked at the Civic Commons, that was the project that I worked on, and I helped bring hundreds of government people together seeking tens of millions of dollars, and we were very, very successful. You all wrote some articles about how Northeast Ohio actually captured between 40 and 45% of those dollars, and the work that I did was very much tied to that. So it's a very pragmatic, practical result of working across the aisle in that way. Another example would be just in the past 12 months, I've been in Columbus twice on behalf of transparency and open government because of the work that I've done. I started a small not-for-profit in late 2014 that was focused on open government. And I've given remarks on behalf of the work that Treasurer Mandel has done. I testified on behalf of a bill in the House for State Representatives Duffy and Christina Hagan, and I also spoke in front of Senator Frank LaRose's committee when I was testifying because of some campaign finance reform that he wants to do. So I think that there are lots of opportunities to both find common ground and stand by people on the other side of the aisle, as well as not giving up your ground as, for me, as a Democrat. So,
Representative Barnes, did you have any response to that?
Yeah, I do. With respect to, first of all, outreach in the community, I have a tremendous amount of outreach. I did 10 town hall meetings 2 years ago, one of which was at Pepper Pike City Hall, and Jill attended that town hall meeting.
That was prior to this reelection.
And in addition to that, I had a district-wide meeting during the president's reelection campaign where I was actually a delegate to the Democratic National Convention. And again, Ms. Zimon was at that particular meeting. These continued examples.
That would have been in 2012?
Of these continued examples, please, could I just...
Was that 2012? Is that what you're talking about?
Could I finish? Could I finish without being interrupted?
I'd just like to know if you meant 2012.
I'm just asking you, can I finish without being interrupted? Thank you. We had an organizational structure. As state representatives, typically during a general election, you run a lot of the president's operations. I've been involved with this leading back to President Clinton. and where I worked on behalf of my predecessor, Ramel Whalen. But at the meeting, I invited about 150 plus public officials, all of the councils, all of the school boards, to that meeting. And that meeting was held at the Harvard Community Services Center, and she was in attendance, so it's false to suggest that. Now, with respect to the issues of government, you got to understand how government works. I don't set the rules. I don't make the rules. But it is a process that you have to learn to navigate. I mean, you can go down there, and there's nobody who, let me just tell you, there's nobody, if you look back over the public record, there's no one who loves to get up on the floor more than I to talk about issues that are important to me. But I have learned over the years that you have to try to talk to people and not at people. The purpose of floor debate, and I learned this watching people like Otto Beatty, watching people like Bill Bachelor before I served in that institution, and how they try to convince people to change their ideas based on a specific piece of legislation. Some of my colleagues don't see it like that. They want a quote in your newspaper. They want to say things that's going to get in there, and then they don't care whether or not they really get something done, but it's more just to promote themselves. And I'm not about that. I'm there to try to work and do the best that I can. And I'm not criticizing anybody else's style. This happens to be my style. And my style is to try to do as much as I can in an environment that I have to function in. And that is a distinct difference between what I am seeing in terms of this campaign and my opponent and what is practical on my side.
I'd like to respond to the how government works. I think a couple of times you've tried to take a tone that would indicate to me that I don't know how government works. Well, I was a council member. I was elected. I won very soundly in Pepper Pike, small community, but part of our district. And in fact, we had a very divided council. I worked underneath a very well-known, very well-respected Republican mayor, Bruce Akers, and my work with them was so successful that I helped create a finance oversight committee during the recession. I was on that committee and I served on that committee. And under the mayor that then came in after Mayor Akers retired, he was a Democrat. He gave me a budget and a committee to create a website and create outreach and be in charge of engagement of our residents. He has done a tremendous job, Mayor Bain, in terms of really running with that and creating many opportunities. But it was under Mayor Akers that I actually became chair of our communications committee. And at that time, in 2010, we had a $3 million deficit on a $10 million budget. Now, a $10 million budget pales compared to the $69 billion budget of this state. However, to the people who pay the taxes and the people who want the services, 30% deficit is huge, and no one knew what had happened. And myself, Gail Mayland, a couple of other members, we put together a finance oversight subcommittee that lasted for 2 or 3 years, did a really tremendous job of really opening things up, providing transparency, and in my opinion, it's an excellent example of understanding how government works, standing on your principles around transparency, oversight, and engagement, and also being pragmatic by working with a Republican mayor.
But you've mentioned repeatedly now transparency, access, engagement, oversight, but this district also has tremendous issues of poverty, of access to services. If I was hearing your opponent correctly, I think there's, he's troubled that maybe you come from the more affluent end of the district and that you would not see to the needs of the constituents that live in the city of Cleveland and some of the poorer inner ring suburbs.
I would certainly hope that that's not an implication that he's trying to make, because that would be blatantly false. But in addition, everything that I've done for the last 28 years since I've been in Northeast Ohio would speak to the opposite of that. My field work was actually in Ward 1 in 1990 under Ruby McCullough. in the Harvard Community Services Center. I have a background in law and social work. I'm currently teaching social welfare policy at Cleveland State right now as a result of how people feel about my knowledge of the area. I serve on the board of the Urban League, and I know you know most of this. So I have many interactions, and have for decades, within a variety of communities. And in fact, what I would say is part of the failure in John's representation of the district is that we have incredible assets in our district. We send an enormous amount of money down to Columbus. We are not getting it back. And I believe that more advocacy is needed to get that back. We shouldn't be just settling for whatever we can divert or whatever is placed in front of us. I think we need to be advocating. I know that we have other state legislators here who are new and are doing just that. They are pragmatic, they're practical, and they use their voice. Janine Boyd, Stephanie House, Amelia Sykes, these are all individuals who have shown time and again, even if they know what the outcome is going to be of a vote, you don't see them not getting up. You don't see them not having meeting after meeting within their community. And again, out of respect for what John pointed to in terms of his engagement, that was all prior to January 2015, after he had been reelected in November of 2014. Since that time, there simply has not been that level of outreach or transparency. And in fact, in regard to transparency, John co-sponsored but did not vote on HB 70, which is often referred to as the Youngstown Takeover Bill. So that was something that was heavily criticized for being done in the dark of the night. He's listed as a co-sponsor of that bill, and yet did not vote on it.
What is the reason for that?
HB 70, with respect to the schools?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I am on HB 70. I have been a proponent for focusing in on students. We have a crisis in this state where our school districts are falling below the state standards for performance in the area of schools. And I think that it's extremely important for us to be practical about how we go about that process. So we've relied on local governments. I was a supporter of the Cleveland plan, where the local board approached me downstate and said, we would like you to support this piece of legislation because we believe that. At that particular time, I said to a lot of people, I said, well, you want to make sure that you put a clause in this legislation to ensure your flow of funds so that you're not affected on the other side. In other words, make the legislation make it whole. Oh, John, we don't need that. I said, okay. So when I got up on the floor and I talked about that, because we're speaking generally in terms of schools, I up on the floor, I said, look, I said, I'm voting for this, but I'm going to be watching. Have we made some progress? Yes, we have indeed made some progress.
Are you speaking about HB 70?
I'm speaking about my general policy about how I go about dealing with schools, and it's reflected in that. I'll have to check on the specifics about HB 70, but I think that my general policy about how I go about education is to look at dealing with the issues that are surrounding students, and that's at-risk factors. I've talked about that over and over again. We finally got the governor to agree on adding $10 million to the budget to begin. That's a small amount of money when you look at the big scheme of things in the state, but the governor was very open to that after I said it to him over and over again. And I think that that will have an impact on all our schools that are troubled in the state of Ohio, including Youngstown.
So just to refresh your memory, though, because I don't know the numbering, but there was a bill that essentially allowed the state to take over the Youngstown schools that was drafted rather hastily, or the amendments to it did not have a hearing. if you were a co-sponsor of that bill, were you aware of that, or were these amendments not done through you?
Ms. Sullivan, as I have said previously, I'm reluctant to co-sponsor a lot of bills because you have a responsibility at that particular point in time to monitor its progress as it goes through the system. I would have to check that. I did not come here prepared today to discuss the bill that Jill has described here. I'd be happy to get back to you on that. Okay?
Yeah.
If I could just add about HB 70, and I think one of the things that makes it a significant matter of John's oversight of legislation that affects us. Warrensville Heights, Maple Heights, in the new report card, I think we're not even calling it a report card, but in the new rankings or ratings that came out, they would be districts that, because of how HB 70 was written, could potentially come under the guise of that new law, which replaces local control. It would be a couple of years, but
if I'm wrong, that HB 70 was a larger bill and it included amendments that were done hastily. The amendments are what you're talking about.
yes.
So that would not necessarily be the responsibility of the co-sponsor, correct? If it's
I
amended,
can't speak to that. I only know that John's name remains on that bill and that he did not vote on that bill. But I think what's also important to know about that bill and about John's record is that that bill does give some monies to charter schools for students that they are able to cull from the district. John received over $100,000 from Students First out of California in the prior election. And I am not suggesting
There you go again.
he can certainly speak to whether or not there's a connection
Boy,
there.
you're full of them.
But I'm stating facts, John.
There you go again.
Your campaign received over $100,000 in independent expenditures from a for-profit, union-busting Students First outfit out of California. This bill, House Bill 70, absolutely has carve-outs for the charter schools in it. And your failure to vote on the Ohio budget also affects the funding for public schools compared to charter schools. I think you do owe an explanation for that.
And I think that you need to go back to the people in the Democratic caucus and have them explain to you what really happened, because they're giving you misinformation.
What are you referring to?
And because which you have cited, and when you sit here and you talk about these kinds of bills, you're talking about things that, in some instances, whether they're truthful or not remains to be, but the tone of them are characteristic with inside discussions. And they're not characteristics with the public information, which means that some information that has become missed, that shows up on your literature, is reflective of information that you yourself would not know about, but you follow it because certain people have provided it to you.
Could you be specific, please?
I think that you need to look at your literature that you put out and be responsible for what's on it.
But you're making an accusation without saying what it is.
You just made an accusation that somehow some organization gave me $100,000 when you know that's not true, Jill.
I spoke very clearly.
Well, Jill,
I said it was an independent expenditure.
And you are a licensed lawyer, right?
I said
you're a licensed lawyer.
I said that your campaign received an independent expenditure of $100,000. I have the documents that show
My campaign
it.
has never received an independent expenditure of $100,000.
Well, I have the documents. I'd be happy to share them.
That is
your name is
Jill,
on it.
That's an example of you not understanding the political process. What you're suggesting is unlawful. What you're suggesting is unlawful.
It's not unlawful.
Because
Independent expenditures are part of Citizens United, John.
It is unlawful for me to participate in any type of expenditure from an outside political action committee that I am a part of.
No one's suggested that.
In a decision before the Supreme Court, corporations and other organizations have the right to have freedom of speech as part of their voice. I have never talked with anybody about that.
No one said that
and
you
I
did.
think you take this a little far, but the way you just said it suggested that it was an independent expenditure of my campaign.
It's an
And that is
independent
not-
expenditure in support of your campaign. That's what the documents show. I have them. You're happy. I'd be happy for you to examine.
That's fine. And so
Receiving no PAC support.
As of today, I have received $500 from the Cleveland Stonewall Democrats Freedom Fund, and I believe that's it.
But in other words, there's no independent expenditure.
No.
You in this campaign
No.
or the prior one, since you're
Correct.
referring to the prior.
Absolutely not. No, I wish. No.
may I? And I think that I just have to say this. What was the name of that organization again? I don't even know.
Students first.
Okay, so Students First, do you know what they do?
Yes.
Okay. Well, on the application before the Democratic Party, where
Which
you
one?
filled
State, county?
well, I was unaware that the state had an application, but
I don't
the
know.
Cuyahoga County Democratic Party issued to me an application, which they shared both of our applications with all of the executive committee. I saw your application. On your application, you indicated down there about charter schools that you had no position. So
No, I think
and
I don't think that's right, but-
and in addition to that, you indicated on that particular application that you essentially supported those kinds of schools. So when you go around and you talk about, I've said this on the floor of the House of Representatives. I said when we were talking about education, I said everybody in the room was represented except children. All right? There are parents in Pepper Pike. There are parents in Orange Village. There are parents in Lee Harvard and Warrensville who want to make a decision about how their kids are educated. We have a system in the Cleveland plan. The Cleveland plan has charter schools in there.
I'm
So
really not
for
sure
you
where
to
you're
sit
going with
here
this.
and talk about some organization and suggest it is, I'm very offended.
Let's move on, because we've actually, we're not that.
And if I could just say one thing about public education, last word on that. Again, the Ohio budget bill spoke a great deal to the funding of public education. You did not vote on the Ohio budget.
And you know what? You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah,
The House installed a new system that's supposed to tie to your iPhones. Now, everybody knows during a budget process, you may come in and we do introductions, we introduce bills, you do a few bills. Then there are some issues where one side or the other doesn't have votes, so they have to discuss about a specific area of a piece of legislation for which some people may not be able to support for one reason or the other. So you're out. There was a breakdown in the system that Texas people, when we are returning to chamber, and in that particular instance, I did not receive a notification on that.
It's the
There
last
were
day
others,
of session, and
there
you're
were
voting
others.
on a $69 billion budget.
Would you,
How
would
many
you
other
please
people
not
missed it?
interrupt? Can you please not interrupt me? I mean, this is just business. It's not personal. We're just talking here. So I was not notified. I informed the speaker. The speaker considered calling everyone back to talk about that. Unfortunately, there were some members that had already left the House grounds, and he decided not to do that.
If you had cast a vote, what would you have cast? What vote would you have cast?
For the budget,
Yeah.
I can't speak on a hypothetical, Ms. Sullivan,
You
but
just said it was just a circumstance that caused you to miss the opportunity to cast a vote. So surely you had a position that you planned.
my vote probably would have been no in that particular instance. To be honest with you, yes.
The last thing on that I would like to say is I've served on a council. I've been in the position of being handed a budget 2 weeks before March 31st and saying to the mayor in my first year, I hadn't even been on for 3 months, and I said, I cannot vote for this because I've only had it for 24 hours. My colleagues tried to persuade me to trust them. And I said, I just got elected. I just got voted in. I'm not going to do that. We need to call special sessions in between now and March 31st to be able to go over it. I cannot imagine what the reaction of a council president or a mayor would be if I simply didn't vote on the largest policy statement of any municipal corporation, period.
All right, you make that pretty clear. There was a national organization that just came out with a report that called Cleveland like the most economically distressed city in the nation, and very slow to get out of the recession, despite the fact there are many good things going on now. Just briefly, start with Jill. If you're a legislator, what do you take from that report? Is there any kind of platform or something you put forward, down there in Columbus to kind of help relieve some of that?
Absolutely. Number one, education. We just heard a fabulous presentation, and there's been quite a bit of information out about the role that universal preschool has in moving us closer towards getting rid of all these gaps, achievement gaps, inequality gaps related to wealth and income. And we know that statewide, barely 4% of the entire state has any kind of quality preschool. It was said at the City Club last week that the rate across other states that have it is around 30%, so there's a huge gap there. It would be really wonderful to work across the aisle with people like State Senator Peggy Lehner, who has been very vocal in supporting universal pre-K. We know what the return on investment is. There's $2 billion sitting in that rainy day budget surplus, whatever the governor would like to refer to that as, and I can't imagine a better way to spend the money than on something like universal pre-K, which I really believe would go a very long way towards alleviating a number of the problems that they point to in terms of the community being distressed.
All right, Mr. Barnes, and briefly as well.
Article 18 of the Ohio Constitution covers the basic framework for the authority of municipal corporations. In the city of Cleveland specific, under a federal consent order, there are aspects of that touch also our building, which has sucked all of the wealth from a lot of people in communities in the city of Cleveland, and then also the health issues with infant mortality rate, and also the fact that there was a second consent order that they had to sign for the environmental issues over at the generation plant. All of that essentially says that there is some incapabilities on the part of the institution of municipal government to manage itself. And that is very, very problematic. In addition to the fact that we have a tremendous amount of corruption that exists within the systems and the institutions that operate, we have got to rid ourselves from that, and we've got to be very practical about how we go about the process of trying to build a better tomorrow for our young people. Most of that begins with promotion, specifically of economic growth, which our office has been intricately involved in terms of this community. In addition to that is health issues, unemployment, and looking at the criminal justice areas and the aspects that have to do with the mental health people that are all on the streets. I was in a meeting with a business leader, and he let everyone go around the room and talk about the wonderful things that they were doing. And then we had a discussion, and he said this. He said, we have a lot of wonderful things going on, but it's not good enough. We have to quit patting ourselves on the back. We have to have expectations, and we've got to organizationally make sure that the expectations of citizens for us to perform in our government system has got to be focused on not whether or not I'm a Democrat or Republican, but whether or not I can focus on getting something done for our community around the idea of economic growth. that will allow people to be a part of that, that will have set-aside programs like we've done at the state of Ohio with the Opportunity Corridor, where for the first time in the history we have a program where we're meeting the goals, and that money is getting out into the community to small businesses that will have an opportunity to do that. In addition to that, we've got to be practical and face the harsh reality. I had a town hall meeting on this a couple of weeks ago that is focused on the new John F. Kennedy High School that's going to be built. When I was a student at John F. Kennedy High School, they had vocational carpentry, they had electronics, they had, and I'm not saying that everyone needs to be a carpenter, but there is a discussion going on within the groups that I have brought together around the idea of building schools that will train people for the needs of the business community. We cannot escape the fact that a lot of our young people are leaving Cleveland. They're dropping out. They're not interested in the curriculum that is being presented to them. We've got to make this process interesting so that we can match people with an opportunity versus going out on the street, and then society will have to begin a process of rehabilitating them within the system. In addition to that, we've got to reach out and make sure that the organizations like the Harvard Community Service Center, like the Senior Center in Maple Heights, have the necessary resources out there so that they can provide services in the community. I brought together all of the leaders in our local high schools to Maple Heights High School. First time that I know of anybody who ever has done that. And we brought them together to have a discussion about what they see as the problem in their schools. To have a discussion with them about, I was in Maple Heights over the weekend and I saw a group of children. I just walked up and started talking with them. And I said, what is the biggest problem you have in your schools? As one young lady looked up, and one of them happened to have been in a meeting that I was in recently up there, and she said, bullying. I said, well, have you ever heard of House Bill 116? It was a bill that I passed that has to do with bullying. So she's going to do that, and we're going to follow up. But all of these multitude, this is what I mean. I don't have the luxury of focusing on one issue. We've got to get in there, and you've got to be committed to looking at a structure, an organizational structure within your office to try to do as much as you can based on what you're doing legislatively to raise the height on the bully pulpit of your office downstate with policymakers and people who are also looking for ideas to come out into the community and do that.
I do want to ask you, Representative Barnes, what is the number one piece of legislation in your tenure in Columbus that you would point to as your proudest moment?
That's very difficult to say, Ms. Sullivan, because I think that if I had to pick in a selfish way, the piece of legislation that I think is most useful to Northeast Ohio and the state as a whole because of our lake, our proximity to the St. Lawrence Seaway, is Sail Ohio Global Initiative. I want to look at small businesses and look at them that are operating on a regional level, give them access to the world. In doing so, you help to promote economic growth. If a business has a positive core and they're operating, you don't want to take that away. What you want to do is get people to come in and to help them take their products. When the state of Ohio, people come to the state and they want bridge loans and they want to do this, that, or the other, we have to show them what we can do with the products that they produce. There are people who fly all over the world every day that do that. And I believe that that's important, and connect to the cultural diversity of this community, the 107 different ethnic groups that have small chamber of commerce, that have consulates, honorary consulates that are here. These people have connections to embassies. that have connections to administrations in other countries that can help move products out of Northeast Ohio and the state of Ohio to the world.
And when did that when was that law enacted?
That law has not been enacted. It is in the pipeline. And we are working through it. And I've been working on that piece of legislation for several years.
Okay. And what is the number of it in the current Congress, or the current legislature?
I think it's through House Bill 3. I'll have to get that to you. Okay.
What would be your top priority legislatively if you were elected?
My top priority legislatively would definitely be focused on education, for sure. I think that is really the foundation of everything. I think getting the adequate funding for public education, no backsliding on the charter school reform. We see that that's stalled now, or we're hearing that that's going to be stalled. We have to have accountability for that. I've personally supported breakthrough schools. I know that we have some excellent not-for-profit charters that deserve to be on the same plane as all the other public schools, but I think we must rein in these online and for-profit charters. I think they're just bleeding. Several of our communities, the Mayfield schools and the Orange schools in particular, pay tens of thousands of dollars for kids out of local dollars because they don't get money from the state. And I think that whole funding scheme, as we know, is something that desperately needs attention. So I think that accountability has to be done. I think the preschool is a huge part. I do agree that I'd love to focus on criminal justice reform. I can tell you that the students in the social work classes that I've taught bring that up on a regular basis, banning the box, things like that. There are a number of social problem areas that I would love to be focused on, along with a number of the other legislators that are there and the efforts that they're trying to make.
Do you guys have any questions?
I was interested in your approach to firearms. It's been, there's been a lot of legislation regarding that. Some of it controversial regarding concealed carry and background checks. And I wondered, John, what position you took on the legislation that having to do with firearms, and Jill, what your approach would be. John first.
I'm not a primary sponsor, but a co-sponsor of several bills, which Representative Patman has introduced. One of which requires a lock on a gun. My office specifically has looked, in legislation that I looked at would have been repetitive, so I supported that. What I have been looking at is violence in some other ways that I think is important. You cannot improve the climate of dealing with guns and situation until we get a handle on providing people with access to economic opportunity. People don't go out robbing people because everything's hunky-dory with them. They go out robbing people because they're trying to survive. That doesn't make it right by any means. It's actually wrong, and it's unlawful. But we've got to do that. With gun, we do need comprehensive gun control. But in the legislature, where the majority of them operate in rural areas, it's very, very difficult to do that. And what you have to do is you've got to be unrelenting in trying to deal with that, and you've got to come back to the local level to try to have implemented programming there that will deal with that. Because currently, to be quite frank, I can sit here and tell you, we're going to do this, that, the other. That's not going to happen right now because of Second Amendment rights and the perceptions around infringing on Second Amendment rights. And so we have to deal with those issues where we have control, and that is here in the city of Cleveland. That is on the local level. In the legislature, there is a sensitivity. In fact, I'm not going to reveal who it is, but I've had some discussions with one of the members of the Tea Party caucus about the issue of how guns are sold at these shows, and because of the relationship I have with him, he has an interest in perhaps joint sponsoring with me a piece of legislation, and so we're
that would do what?
Well, what the legislation would require, the federal law now requires that they have some registrations. There are, however, people that are not doing the background checks at the shows, and we know based on several articles that I've read that there has to be a certain degree of truth in the reporting, that a lot of people are buying the semi-automatic guns at these shows where they're just traded. In fact, when they have them, people out in the parking lot cutting deals out the back of their trucks, out the trunk of their cars.
We've heard that too.
So you've heard it. So you have to look at it in the context of what can we do to regulate the access to the opportunity. And so that's discussion, and I've sat down also
The
with...
legislation, though, would do what?
Well, the legislation specifically would require that the background checks, very similar to someone going into a gun shop, and it would make them require. Currently, they're not. It's just not happening.
I just had a follow-up question.
Sure.
On I can't remember the timing. Were you in the legislature when the laws were passed, allowing people to carry in taverns where they sell alcohol? Were you there when that legislation was passed? I can't remember.
We literally passed thousands of bills, hundreds of bills. So I don't. That may have been back in the 90s. In 2000, somewhere around
No,
there.
I think
but
this
I
was
don't-
recent.
No, it was within the last.
Yeah, he's
2 to 3
been
years.
in there since.
What was that?
2011.
What was the bill?
Allowing people with a concealed carry license to bring their weapons into a.
I'm sure I would have been a no
Bar and
vote.
restaurant.
Yes.
A no vote on that. That's no. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the bill number.
What would your approach be?
I think our public is always a good barometer, and we know that people support background checks. They support the universal background checks. They support closing the gun loopholes. I think one of our biggest problems has been this erosion of our the Ohio Constitution's provision of home rule, and we've seen that play out in places like Oberlin and even the city of Cleveland. So I think that's a huge issue much like I love the example of the dredging and not letting go of that. I think that this issue around home rule and being able to allow cities to deal with things like the gun laws themselves is something that's a fight worth having in terms of trying to advocate to get that control back. I do think there are community standards, especially in the urban communities, that should be respected related to what people want and what the legislators have been able to provide in terms of protection around the use of guns. I respect the Second Amendment and have no desire to abridge it, but I think to the extent that the public supports on a very broad basis, even NRA membership supports a number of these kinds of measures to make things a little bit safer and make the job of the police enforcement safer. And I think when you hear from police enforcement associations and what they're dealing with as a result of some of the laws out there or lack of laws, I think it's very concerning. I think the lowering of the number of hours required for training is shocking. I think that my recollection is when that bill was going through, the justification was just that it was easier to do a certain number of hours over a certain period of time rather than have it take up a weekend or 2 days. In my opinion, that is not an adequate reason to change the number of hours of training. Either you need the training or you don't. It's not how many days it takes. So, I appreciate you asking the question. It's complicated. I'd like to see home rule be more powerful in that.
On that issue,
Sure.
what would you do with the idea that a gun owner or somebody who has concealed carry goes to one town, he's legal, and the next town he's not, and they're having to sort out what's the legal carry laws.
I think that's such a classic tension that we have with so many things around. Do you make something uniform and standardize it across? We talk about that with education. We talk about it with same-sex marriage. Obviously, with driver's licenses, reciprocity and what do you respect? So I'm not sure. I'd love to hear more debate about that. I've met in person and I've been at debates, intimate debates with folks from the Buckeye Firearms Association. They're caring, they're smart, they're sincere. And I trust being able to sit down and debate and hear from them and have them hear from me. That's what coming up with good policy is about. It's about that dialogue, and that's obviously civic engagement and dialoguing. That's
We're
something I'm very
out of
interested
time.
in.
I'd like you each to take no more than 2 minutes, please, and wrap up. Joe, start with you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for the breadth of the conversation and all the subjects that we've covered. It would be an honor to be able to represent the people of House District 12 and the 10 communities that are there. I think they deserve a voice. I think they deserve to have someone who will vote regardless of the controversy and not make excuses for why they were or weren't there. I think it's incumbent on the legislator to be informed about what their name is on, to be informed about things like a $69 billion budget. That is not something that I would be derelict about. And I would want to take my cues from the people. It is not just a matter of meeting with public officials or mayors. It's also about making sure that your presence is known, that they have they meaning the people, have a feedback loop to reach you so that you know what your charge is down there. Being able to work across the aisle is of course important when your party is in the minority, but also being able to stand on principle side by side with those who believe and support and advocate on the same things as you do is also something important. John is correct. There are many, many issues, but I don't know that any one of them should be called a luxury or be expended at the cost of another one, least of all women and children, when we know exactly what their suffering is going to be like as a result of some of the things that John has not voted on. So I would like to say that my record, my experience, my reputation demonstrates that I do know how to work across the aisle. I do know how to get things done. I'm very, very intent on making sure that the outreach is there and that people know that they're being heard throughout the 10 communities of this district. No one vote is worth more than any other vote within that district, and I think all 113,000 people deserve to be represented on every vote.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative
This election is a very, very important election. I think the plain dealer for once again bringing candidates together and having a discussion about where we are, where we want to go, and how to get there. It's extremely important that we develop smart politics and practical outlooks and insights about what is possible. The loudest person in the room is often not the smartest person in the room, nor the person that gets things done. There is a process in Columbus. I didn't invent it. I didn't create it. I love the American system of government, but sometimes it gives you a toothache. But you have to be practical enough to recognize that you are a representative and not representing sort of your own ideologies. When I returned to the legislature, we had huge deficit, unemployment. This whole nation was in trouble. What I knew and what I've experienced, and I've spoken out about the raising of the interest rates by the Federal Reserve, because I felt the area of Cleveland and Cleveland as a whole has experienced really uneven growth. And so given that, we still, other parts of the country that are now flourishing in some people's eyes, truth of the matter is that we have a long, long ways to go. Normally when you have this cycle, you have about a 5-year recovery. This is going to be every bit of a 10-year recovery because of the wealth that's been taken. So when you sit here and I'm asked appropriate questions about guns, when I'm asked appropriate questions about how we deliver and provide health care, when I'm asked appropriate questions about what's going to be the future of our young people in schools, when I'm asked appropriate questions about why there are chuck holes on the streets and why there's not a blend of ideas that are bipartisan that come together. There was a poll in the Wall Street Journal, and the Wall Street Journal found that the most important issue is, number one, economic growth, and number two, to systematically find a way to eradicate deadlock. And if I can tell you this, if I were in charge, there might be a very, very different picture. But operating in this, my only focus is on one thing, and that is getting the votes that I need to get done what I want to do. And that is a process. I can get them sometimes, but at other times I don't have access to that opportunity because of the ideological views. So you don't stop progress on the base of ideology. You try to make incremental progress that is going to serve the common interests of humanity, people. That's what my focus has been on. And I thank you so much for having this.